Greetings, friends, and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany's Sunday service experience. Whether you are joining us in body or in spirit, on Zoom or in person, we greatly appreciate your presence here today. My name is Jacob King, and I use he, him, his pronouns. I am this congregation's current ministerial intern. I hope those of you who participated in the St. Patrick's Day festivities yesterday had an uplifting and enjoyable experience. I still do not know why the city of Albany celebrated the holiday a week before the rest of the world, but I digress. Got one. Because of the NCAA tournament next weekend, so go NCAA. Some of you, such as myself, may also be understandably tired this morning. As we found out this morning, we will be losing an hour of sleep due to the time change. Our service today is designed to be reflective of our faith commitment to building beloved community. Next slide, please. On the screen is our current congregation's mission and vision statement, reflective of this commitment to building beloved community. Albany UU's current mission statement is, "We welcome everyone. Our Unitarian Universalist community seeks truth and deeper meaning, pursues justice through inspired action, and cultivates compassion and love for all connected by the web of life." Albany UU will be an inclusive, welcoming congregation. Our sacred work is to lift hearts, broaden minds, and do justice in the world in service of building beloved community. Beloved community is defined by our current Unitarian Universalist Association president, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, as a community that practices a radically inclusive and compassionate, anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural, multi-generational faith within, and acts powerfully in partnership and solidarity for justice and liberation beyond. Some folks within our community have expressed concerns about this change within our tradition, and as such, I've been offering open discussions with members of this congregation around the topic of building beloved community. My email shown on the screen, jking@albanyuu.org, is the best way to reach me. It also goes out in the newsletter every week. In honor of building beloved community, our reading today is selected by our congregation's Director of Religious Education, Elizabeth Valdez, uplifting a message that it is okay to be different. Our music selection is curated by our music director, Olga Martinez. Our message today is titled Right, Wrong, and Gray. We will explore the ways as you use we are called to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world. During the service, we will also uplift resources from the Asian and Pacific Islander AAPI community. We will also explore wisdom from the Buddhist tradition. Let us begin.
Good morning.
Please join us in our congregation's chalice lighting and the words shown on the screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning. We are here to excite the human spirit. We respond morally and ethically to a troubled world and to enter. Back to you, Olga. Thank you so much, Olga, for those lovely music pieces, and Elizabeth for that really lovely and inclusive children's story. Our reading today is an excerpt from How to Read the News Mindfully, written by Matthew Williams with the Order of Interbeing, a foundation started by Vietnamese author and Zen Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. I will start with a confession. I am a news addict, but one who, despite that, tries to read the news mindfully, though admittedly, there is something of a contradiction in this. They have on a number of occasions encouraged us to read the news no more than once a week, warning that reading it more often can water such unwholesome mental formations as anger and despair. In my own experience, he is not wrong about the ways in which regularly reading the news can weigh down one's spirit, fostering not only anger or despair, but also a certain degree of jadedness to the suffering one reads about. But given that I do teach and research in the fields of sociology and global studies, I actually need to read the news nearly daily to remain properly informed about the developments in areas I study and teach to my classes and community. But even given that, I read the news more than I need to, sometimes checking my favorite news sites several times a day as a way of taking a break from whatever it is I am working on. I do so partly out of unhealthy habit energy, but partly also out of a genuine interest in learning more about the lives of others. Across the world, wanting to deepen my understanding and thereby my compassion for the people I read about. Given all this, I've tried to make reading the news part of my mindfulness practice, to make it something that really does help deepen my understanding and compassion rather than letting it be something that weighs me down with despair and anger that makes me jaded or that I feel guilty about doing too often. In particular, I try to take reading the news as an opportunity to practice the fourth of 14 mindfulness trainings of the Order of Interbeing. The fourth is the awareness of suffering. The awareness of suffering. The training reads in part, we are committed to finding ways, including personal contact and using telephone, electronic, audiovisual, and other means to be with those who suffer, so we can help them transform their suffering into compassion, peace, and joy. This seems to me a clear encouragement to make ourselves aware of the suffering, not only of those we encounter face to face and personally, but also those who are both geographically and socially potentially distant from us. We may not be always able to aid them in hands-on ways, but by raising others' awareness of their plight and engaging in advocacy and activism, we can support them. Our two meditation for today, which will play momentarily, will be using sounds and videos from a song by Marsoni Union titled Weightless. The song was recently clinically proven to induce relaxation in a study done by the British Academy of Sound Therapy. Pretty official. On the screen will be a serene mountain pond with occasional movement on the screen. I invite you to take a moment to ground yourself in body and spirit and participate as you feel comfortable. Let us begin.
Stop sinking to having touch.
They wanted an encore. Put the pretty sermon slide up so they don't need to watch me fumble with this. How's that? Perfect. On the screen for our sermon message today, Right, Wrong, and Gray, was a image selected by our administrative assistant, Sapphire. And it's a picture of a road in a snowy mountain with a left or a right, similar to that Robert Frost poem many of us may be familiar with about the road less traveled by. And the Sapphire explained to me when she looked at the left and right as the right, wrong, I asked her where the gray was, and she said it could be either forward or backwards. That was a fairly fair answer. On the screen in just a moment will be some opening wisdoms for today from our friend of humanity, Thich Nhat Hanh, known as Thay by his friends. Thich Nhat Hanh was a Vietnamese monastic Buddhist spiritual leader, friend of humanity, and offers us this wisdom. Let us fill our hearts with our own compassion towards ourselves and towards all living beings. On the next slide of our screen is our primary source, sermon key takeaway for today, and the form I will be using and following during this message. The primary source I used for this message is The Buddha, The Story of Siddhartha by David Grubin. The sermon's key takeaway for today is navigating the gray, even through beloved community, is challenging. Yet through beloved community, we can navigate the gray challenge of the gray together. Our sermon form today will begin with this current introduction, showcase 3 points, and end with a conclusion around our sermon's key takeaway. In point 1, titled Right, we will examine what is right with the world, and then showcase a clip of the Buddha's wistful bliss. In point 2, focused on wrong, we will examine what is wrong with the world, then showcase a clip of the Buddha's 4 encounters. In point 3, titled Gray, we will examine the murky gray our world often resides, then showcase a clip of the Buddha's arduous decision. This message is relevant for us to examine as our faith tradition continues to navigate an increasingly complex world. Next slide, please. I'm going to share with you some facts from the Pew Research Center around news engagement amongst U.S. adults. Studies show a large majority of U.S. adults, 82%, say they often or sometimes get news from a smartphone, computer, or tablet, which including 49% who say they do so often, which I have a smartphone right here. That is my primary news source, I will admit. Half of Americans at least sometimes get news from social media, and about a quarter, 23%, say the same of podcasts. Americans turn to radio and print publication for news far less frequently than to digital devices and television. There is no greater time in our world's history where you can have almost limitless access to information and news at the touch of your fingertips, such as by this smartphone, shown here as long as I have mobile data. As you use, we are often called to uplift successes in our congregation and society at large. We also agree to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world. Access to news and information assists in this endeavor. What about the news where the decisions are not so clear-cut, this proverbial realm of gray? I again offer the key takeaway to keep in mind that navigating the gray, even through beloved community, we can navigate the challenge of the gray together. I'm going to showcase here on the slide in just a moment if the mic comes back on. Perfect. On the handheld mic. How's that? Perfect. On the slide in just a moment as I move to my left, your right side of the stage, is going to be one of my favorite sources for news as a young US adult. Maybe. Look at that. This is, for many of you in the audience may be familiar with, a social media aggregate site called Reddit, with 500 million unique individual users across the world every month visiting this site. It is primarily a US focused site. When I was trying to find allusions to where I like to get some good uplifting news, this happens to be called Uplifting News. So this is a forum that people can go to, and as the title implies, only uplifting positive news here. Let's see, what was the top news for this week? Transgender healthcare is now protected in Minnesota. Heck yeah, we gotta uplift those victories because we know many states across the world are continuing to attack our LGBTQIA two-spirits plus folks across the US. You know, if you take a look for how many members are subscribed, so this particular subreddit has almost 19 million unique individuals across the world, primarily the US, subscribed for uplifting news. And whenever I took this screenshot, there was almost 4,000 people online. So a lot of uplifting news. The challenge, obviously, is if this was the only place I got my site, the only place where I got my news, I'd probably have a skewed interpretation of reality. We learn through texts such as white fragility that, especially myself, being a white male of privilege, when I interpret even proverbial negative news, the concept of even climate change impacts me less with my privilege than it does many members of our AAPI community, BIPOC community, and Indigenous peoples who get to experience those unfortunate realities of climate injustice firsthand, as we experienced in our own community of hurricanes throughout New York City a few years ago. On the screen, I'm gonna, as we discussed, showcase an allusion to the Buddha's own experience about being in that sheltered world only experienced to positive news.
Born some 500 years before the birth of Jesus, the Buddha would grow to manhood in a town vanished long ago. For nearly 3 decades, he would see nothing of the world beyond. The tales say he was the son of a king, raised in a palace with every imaginable luxury. He was called Siddhartha Gautama, a prince among a clan of warriors. When I was a child, he said, I was delicately brought up, most delicately. A white sunshade was held over me day and night to protect me from cold, heat, dust, dirt, and dew.
And it was predicted that he would be able to conquer wherever he wanted if he remained as a king. So the father was creating this artificial environment to coddle him.
His father wanted to prevent him from ever noticing that anything might be wrong with the world, because he hoped that he would stay in the life they knew and loved and not go off as was predicted at his birth and possibly become a spiritual teacher rather than a king.
Spiritual teacher rather than a king, as I move to my right, your left side of the stage. The Buddha, as the video described, 500 years before Jesus, was living in a sheltered world. He had anything you could think of in terms of wealth and opulence and decadence, living in a palace, the son of a king, born to be the future king. And his father did the best that he could to try to shelter him from the outside world, because the sages at his birth predicted that either he would become a great king or he would become a great spiritual leader, which hindsight and history has shown us which path the Buddha chose. On the stage, we're going to get to the second part of our message, the bad or negative news. And it's going to come from another subreddit in just a moment. Look at that, world news. Now, why did I pick world news? So this subreddit is a little bit different than the uplifting news subreddit, not just in terms of name, but in terms of sheer subscribers. So the uplifting news, 19 million people. This one, almost 32 million people. And when I came online for this one, it looks like there was almost 30,000 people online. So more people browsing world news than the uplifting news. And unfortunately, the world news has come under scrutiny over the years because even though it implies world news, it only allows or uplifts predominantly inherently negative, biased, not necessarily biased news, but only negative news in context. And so it's good to keep informed, but let's see, the top post of this week, International Women's Day, Afghan women blast the Taliban and say the world has neglected us completely. So fair criticism, fair points. If this is a great place to get news because it exposes you to that reality. During our reading today, when they described reading the news mindfully, he says that he still reads the news from people he might not be able to fully touch or fully connect with, but to keep their joys, their sorrows in his heart, and so he can respond morally and ethically to a troubled world. And that's often what we are designed to do as Unitarian Universalists, is we covenant to respond to injustices in our society's clear wrongs. We're going to play another clip from the Buddha and his first encounters with proverbial negative news.
And so, the stories say, he indulged himself for 29 years, until the shimmering bubble of pleasure burst.
His father does everything he can to never let him leave, never let him see the suffering that life is. But one day he goes outside and he's traveling through the kingdom and he has the first of 4 encounters. He sees an old man and he asks his attendant, and the attendant says, "Oh, that's change. One doesn't always stay young and perfect." Then on the next tour outside, he sees a sick man and doesn't quite understand what it is. He asks his attendant, and the attendant says, "Oh, that happens to all of us."
Then he sees that it isn't just the sick person, in fact it's universal, and something is stimulated inside of him, so he keeps getting the chariot driver to take him out, and he sees, horror after horror.
And on his 3rd trip outside, he meets a corpse. And he recognizes impermanence and suffering and death as the real state of things. The world that he had been protected from, shielded from, kept from seeing.
And he was shocked. He was shocked, and he realized, this is my fate too.
As I move to the bottom of the stage, I want to re-uplift what one of the narrators said about this was his first time being exposed to the realities of the world. And what this clip didn't show is he also had a 4th encounter with a beggar who his attendant informed him had relinquished the wealth of the world, all attachment. And this was a very impactful encounter for the trajectory the Buddha followed, where he eventually sought to seek out the path to become an enlightened being. What he ends up having to do, which we'll showcase in terms of the gray, is he has to make a difficult decision to continue down that path. In an increasingly complex world, we can easily uplift the positive news and easily respond to the clear injustices. But sometimes we experience that murky gray of in the between, where there's not a clear answer for right and wrong. On the screen is going to be some recent news that our own faith tradition is struggling with in terms of the UU Young Adult Divestment Caucus Business Resolution 2023 to the Unitarian Universalist Association. Read off some facts here. So the UUA invests in stocks through the UU Common Endowment Fund, UUCEF. This fund includes many congregations. The UUCF has invested $13 million of shares into the fossil fuel industry. $13 million of shares. When we're talking about navigating this right, wrong, navigating this gray, this is something our own tradition is going to have to vote on together, of where do we find our balance in terms of our values and our commitment, but also our commitment to growth and increasingly more funding spent doing social justice work, more funding spent doing outreach work. The work of Beloved Community does take funds, because as you have seen, so there are other groups doing similar outreach work, not uplifting necessarily a message of love. And it's not so much that their message is more powerful than what UU offers. It's oftentimes simply comes down to budget and resources. For those of you who watched the Super Bowl, I think I talked about it the last service. That company spent $30 million getting 2 commercials of Jesus into the Super Bowl. That's the 1-year annual budget of the UA in most cases. We're going to showcase a video from the Buddha and the arduous decision he had to make.
Late one summer evening, Siddhartha went into his wife's room. A lamp of scented oil lit up. His wife lay sleeping on a bed strewn with flowers, cradling their newborn son in her arms. He gazed from the threshold, deep in thought. If I take my wife's hand from my son's head and pick him up and hold him in my arms, it will be painful for me to leave. He turned away and climbed down to the palace courtyard.
In case you might not be familiar with the context of that video we just shown, that was the decision, that murky, arduous choice the Buddha had to make to leave his family, his new wife, his new partner, and his newborn child to pursue his chosen path. Like some of you, when I first heard the decision the Buddha made, I was taken aback. How could someone so noble and pure have the heart and desire to leave their partner, Yasadora, and child behind? Is a complex question. Through whatever medium the Buddha connected with, the news of his calling felt real to him. And so he made the decision to leave of his own volition. Many Buddhist communities wrestle with this question even today, but still overall support the Buddha and the impact that decision led. This documentary showcases the Buddha one day returning to Yasadora and his family, and Yasadora even forgives the Buddha, eventually joining his community or Sangha and becoming the first nun of Buddhism. The Buddha was, like many of us, human, and in an increasingly complex world, we are often called to make complex decisions within our lives and our world, which have ever increasing impacts and ramifications. On the screen in just a moment, I want to really uplift the key takeaway from our message today, that navigating the gray even through Beloved Community is challenging, yet through Beloved Community, we can navigate the challenge of the gray together. On the screen is a stone image of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, 563 to 483 BCE. Though I do not claim every right, wrong, and gray news we receive can be responded to in a Beloved Community, the Beloved Community provides that foundation of love, that foundation of support, and that foundation of empathetic, compassionate leaning of support. We will close this message today with some wisdom from Kiyoshi Kuromiya, Japanese American, LGBTQIA 2 Spirits Plus icon, and AIDS activist. On the slide is a photo of Kiyoshi's impeccable smile, along with a pride flag emblazoned heart, a symbol he deeply represented. The right to know is the most important human right. The right to know is the most important human right. Next slide. May it be so.
Good morning. My name is Eric von Hausen. I'm the service associate today, and it is truly a joy to be with you on this beautiful, almost spring morning. Before I introduce the offering, we need to note that with the exception of OWL for grades 8 and 9, Sunday morning programming for children and youth ends at 11:15. If you have children in pre-K through 5th grade, please pick them up from their classrooms at that time. Older kids will be released on their own at 11:15 to reconnect with their grown-ups. Please feel free to leave the service when it's time to pick up your children. An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. Another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous contribution as we pass the plate, or via one of the options shown on this next slide. If you are joining us virtually, you can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window to contribute, or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples on the slide show you how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose of your gift. We must now say goodbye to our Facebook friends. Consider joining us on Zoom next time, or visit us in person at 405 Washington Avenue, Albany. You can find more information at albanyuu.org. Olga?
So we're going to continue with the dissonance this morning. I am not Annie Lipinski. I'm Sandy Stone, and I am on as PCA today. Joining me is Alice Sage. This is the time set aside in our service for sharing significant personal milestones in our lives. There are several ways to share a joy or sorrow. On Zoom, you can click on the raise hand symbol. The technician will call on you to unmute and share your joy or sorrow. Those in Community Hall will be able to come forward and select a stone to place in the bowl on the table. If you wish, you can share your joy or sorrow at the microphone. Please also consider sharing your joy or sorrow after the service with one of the pastoral care associates. We'll begin by reading items that were submitted this past week. That will be followed by the spoken joys and sorrows on Zoom, and finishing with any joys and sorrows to be shared in Community Hall. Do we have any joys and sorrows that were submitted in advance?
I have no pre-submitted joys or sorrows, and so far we have no raised hands on Zoom.
All righty. Then please, if anyone would like to come forward to move a stone. If you wish to speak your joy or sorrow, you can wait with Anne at the microphone. as I select a stone on behalf of those joys and sorrows that are left unspoken, let us hold all that we've heard and felt in our hearts.
Well, speaking of dissonance this week, that's what I'm currently experiencing. As many of you know, my shtick is I uplift the joys and sorrows which are spoken aloud or shared, and apparently there is no joys or sorrows this week. But we all know that's not the case. So I ask if you're willing and able, I invite you to join me in a prayer, meditation, or reflection, whatever you are most comfortable with, as I offer a blessing for this week. Spirit of hope and love, I am so grateful to be in the presence of such wonderful folks today in body or spirit who are truly committed to the sacred work we do as a community and building beloved community. Though there were no joys and sorrows outwardly spoken, we know life can be complex and filled with similitudes of both joys and sorrows. Sorrows I uplift this week is the women of the country of Afghanistan living under totalitarianism. Many regimes and countries across the world, including the United States, which claims to be a democratic society, is continuing to attack the bodily autonomy and freedom of movement of women or folks who identify as such. I also uplift many joys this week, even though across the country in the US, people of LGBTQI identities are being attacked for no other purpose than because of who they are. The many victories that are still being had. Apathy seems to be the cause of many movements to suffer and to dissolve, but it's clear to me from the work this community does and agencies that it supports that we are still going to rise against racism, rise against systems of oppression, and rise against and advocate for the bodily autonomy of all folks, regardless of their race, creed, gender, expression, or national origin. I offer this blessing with peace, hope, and love. May it be so.
We'd like to get to know guests and visitors to our service. If you'd like to tell us who you are or where you're from, those here in Community Hall should stand and raise your hand. The usher will bring you a microphone so that everyone can hear you. Those joining us on Zoom, click the raise hand symbol. Our technician will invite you to unmute and introduce yourself. You can also click on the visitor link you'll now find in the chat window.
We have no raised hands on Zoom at this time.
Okay. Nobody? Okay. Thank you and welcome all who have joined us today. If you'd like to learn more about our congregation or Unitarian Universalism, you can stop by the table in the lobby and speak with our welcome table host. On Zoom, you can find in the participant window someone with welcome before their name. You can reach out to that person in the chat window. There will also be opportunities to socialize and welcome newcomers after the service, both for those on Zoom and those here in Community Hall. For the community announcement, were there any submitted announcements? Pre-submitted, Kate?
I have no pre-submitted announcements.
Okay. Then I also draw your attention to the announcements printed in the order of service and shown on the screen.
Good morning. I'm Molly Daniels. I'm the president of the congregation, and the Board of Trustees is your coffee host today. So please come enjoy the snacks that we're providing today. Also, staying with the theme of dissonance. So we are at a point in our church year where we're preparing the budget for our next fiscal year. And there's tension there anytime you're working on that, because there are all of these new ideas and projects and things that we want to accomplish to continue to be a vibrant community. And there's money needed to make that happen. And so there's a gap that has to be filled for us to make that happen. And so there is tension there. So you may have gotten your stewardship letter from myself and Chuck Manning. We are hoping that you will rise to the challenge and look at the messages that we put out both in video and in the letter around what those exciting new projects and things are that we want to accomplish this year, and that you will help us towards those endeavors. I really liked that quote that you shared about in beloved community working through the challenge towards the gray. I think that really fits here. So anyway, there is a box next to the snacks that you can drop your stewardship campaign slip into. So we welcome you to do that this week, and we'll also make sure that box is available over the next few weeks as well. So thank you.
Don't Miss the Flower, a short Zen story from Thich Nhat Hanh. One day, the Buddha held up a flower in front of an audience of 1,250 monks and nuns. He did not say anything for quite a long time. He did not say anything for quite a long time. The audience was perfectly silent. Everyone seemed to be thinking hard, trying to see the meaning behind the Buddha's gesture. Then suddenly the Buddha smiled. He smiled because someone in the audience smiled at him and the flower. The name of that monk was Mahakaya AAPI. He was the only person who smiled. And the Buddha smiled back and said, I have a treasure of insight, and I have transmitted it to Mahakaya AAPI. That story has been discussed by many generations of Zen students and people who continue to look for its meaning. To me, the meaning is quite simple. When someone holds up a flower and shows it to you, he wants you to see it. If you keep thinking, you miss the flower. Again, if you keep thinking, you miss the flower. The person who was not thinking, who was just himself, was able to encounter the flower in depth, and he smiled. That is the problem of life. If we are not fully ourselves, truly in the present moment, we miss everything. When a child presents himself to you with his smile, if you are not really there, thinking about the future or the past or preoccupied with other problems, then the child is not really there for you. The technique of being alive is to go back to yourself in order for the child to appear like a marvelous reality. Then you can see him and you can embrace him in your arms.
our closing hymn today. With heart and mind. Please rise as you are able and sing with me, with heart and mind.
As we extinguish the chalice, please join in the words shown on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Those on Zoom are encouraged to join a breakout room for conversation and fellowship. You can click to accept the breakout room assignment when it appears on your screen. Those in Community Hall are invited to attend coffee hour. We especially encourage guests and visitors to join us for coffee and refreshments. Anyone on Zoom or in Community Hall is welcome to attend a congregational response. You can stay in the Zoom meeting or right here in Community Hall, and the discussion will begin in a few minutes. Those wishing to socialize with others are asked to exit Community Hall so that the congregational response can start promptly. We're glad you joined us today. This concludes our service. Thank you.